I have really significant concerns about the use of social media. However, I have come across some really interesting people, and this is a really, really simple way of putting it. You can either get a machine to analyse 100,000 tweets, or you can get a person to analyse 1,000. And I tell you, a person analysing 1,000 is tremendously more valuable than any machine is doing the work. Social media, or any kind of user-generated content, to try and put a binary, is that a positive or is that a negative response? I mean, that's just ludicrous. How can you possibly tell whether I'm being sarcastic in my tweet or not? So, my view for that would be really careful about what people are promising you. I've met companies that are promising all sorts of things through social media analysis, and my feeling would be that lower volumes but higher examination is a far better way of doing it. I've met companies that are capable of analysing kind of 1 million tweets. You're better off analysing 500 in my view. And it's a sophisticated game. It's a really, really sophisticated game. I think it's very trendy, and a lot of people want to get social media analysis out there, and it's something that people think that they need to do. The value of it, the devil is in the detail. Doing it on a huge global basis is not that useful. One of the major things that I always try and talk to clients about with digital is think about segments of your audience, think about the segments of the video. Just because you can survey 1 million people doesn't mean that you should. And don't ever assume that one group thinks the same thing. There's a fascinating company that I met recently called Human Digital, who are doing this stuff, and they're doing it for government, and they're doing it on a really, really targeted basis. And they're probably the most interesting people that I've come across in this space, because it's a human-driven analysis that they're doing with very, very, very intelligent people analysing smaller volumes. So that's what I would say. Scale is not the solution in this space.
Pete, the question is, what checks and balances should be put in place to ensure both ethical and representativeness?
I think it's difficult. I mean, it's immensely difficult based on just what Emma said. When you're talking about that extreme amount of potential data, is policing it, it's not worth thinking about. I mean, at the end of the day, I deal with small numbers, so I'm happy in that space. But the fact of the matter is, we have to embrace something because people are actually doing it. I mean, digital organisations you just talked about, and also people tweeting sort of, can't imagine sort of thousands upon thousands of tweets and trying to get something meaningful out of it is really quite frightening. So I think it's not going to go away, and that's the point. So therefore, we need to sit there and address it, and it's as much addressing people who are working in a digital environment and how they're using it, and it's much bringing them into the net, because I suspect a lot of them are outside it.
But do you think there's any value in the content? Whether you machine analyse or human analyse, however, is there actually any value in the content? Is it worth looking at?
It's valuable because it's current. It's valuable because it has a currency in the mindset of consumers. It's how consumers are behaving. And we have to move with the times. We have to mirror how our consumers are actually behaving out there. So, this is what, most people are actually behaving in one way, shape or form. Now, I don't know whether there's a magic sort of one where we can actually create a means by measuring it, but we certainly need to start thinking about it as a means of doing it. And, coming back to Emma's point, would I rather have one person analysing 1,000? Of course I would, because at least you've got a human element in there which is actually analysing and doing some sort of process which is meaningful within the environment in which we operate.
Leslie? you could grab the mic over there. To what extent are you using social media at the FSA?
We use social media to act as a barometer on brand. So who's saying what about the FSA? And we've been running that with our communications team for a while. We set up a development project to use the same tool as a research opportunity. I'm kind of close to giving it up, actually. As a research tool, we just haven't found a way of cracking it. As an intelligence stream, we're very interested in it. What we're interested in is conversations that start, a ripple starts somewhere about a product or a provider or a service where there's a failing and where there's detriment. And I want to see how fast those ripples start to travel. And that's the real challenge about the digital arena. A pebble somewhere has a ripple effect which just magnifies and magnifies. So we need to not have the next Northern Rock run. You know, the FSA was found wanting, seriously wanting over Northern Rock. We knew it was going to happen. It was a car crash waiting to happen. We didn't intervene until it had happened, and it was too late. The FCA, in its new guise, has got to spot where the risks are. And social media is a very powerful opportunity for us to winnow what's going on out there, not from a research perspective, but from an intelligence perspective. We need to know what's starting to come out, and then we need to do a risk analysis on those conversations and then plug the risk into the research. So if anything, social media won't be a research tool, it will be an alert for the research to happen, to really get to understand the risk and the interventions or the market treatments we need to bring in to either head them off or reduce the detriment.
Giles, is social media something that, you know, when you're looking at commissioning research and research projects, is it something that you always consider as part of what you should be doing?
I think, as Leslie says, I think you monitor what is happening on social media platforms, but it isn't a substitute. Because while somebody tweets something and it might be retweeted, and you get that ripple effect, it doesn't necessarily mean to say it's been read. I don't know the proportion of tweets that are actually read. I mean, if people are following 10,000 people, how many do they read in a day? 20? Well, in terms of the hit rate then, it's going to be quite low. I think the other thing to remember always is, and I don't know the stat, but remember that the majority of conversations aren't held on social media. You know, so if you are going to employ someone full time to look at all of your mentions on some sort of social media, would it be better to go and shop down the pub for a few evenings a week and listen to conversations there? But the answer is not, but you know, be wary that the majority of conversations aren't happening on social media. So don't forget about other channels.
Jane, the question was about checks and balances, about ethics and privacy as well. So, you know, how are you viewing social media content at the moment? How are you advising members of the MRS in terms of the validity of using this type of data?
Well, I think we always... can I answer that as an ex-client, maybe? Because just my last job was to form a digital strategy and a marketing strategy for revenue and customs. And they spent a fortune with some sort of software that was supposed to analyse the streams of social media on tax and tax evasion and what are people getting away with. And frankly, in 6 months, I didn't find anything usable out of the whole thing because you're right, it didn't have a sense of humour. It didn't know and couldn't keep up with trends in actual language. It couldn't keep up with trends in language. So I think it comes back to when, in terms of MRS, we advise people first what to do, to go back to that same basic, I'm sorry, very boring question. What are you doing it for? And therefore, what's the best way of doing it? I do think it's an intelligence thing, and I do think as a lot of media owners ought to be interested in the behaviour of tweeting, and I don't see much research into that, and I think it would be quite interesting to see some of that. But it does feel to me a bit like behavioural economics, you know, it's the latest label that everyone has to do something about, and the problem is it's very costly, these nice pretty pop science labels.
But you call it intelligence, and I think we understand the difference between intelligence and research, but nevertheless it falls within the remit of the MRS, and I guess we do need to have some sort of guidance as to whether we should be looking at this, how we should view it, and so on, in the same way that we have guidelines on several other things.
Yeah, we're updating the code to cope with the new issues of mobile particularly and social, so that's in development at the moment. The problem with developing things like codes is that you're always slightly behind the times, because obviously you're following trends and patterns. But I think that the more we emphasise the importance of the code and ethics as part of standards, not just as a way of stopping people doing things, and as part of promoting ourselves as a profession, the more people will stop and think. But it's, we need to get the big suppliers and the big clients to be doing this, not just little old MRS, frankly.